Hi everyone, my name is Jaden Bede, a student at the University of Montana and hopeful law student in the future. Welcome to the first episode of the Legal Intern Diaries, Montana edition. Now, to kind of start off, I'm going to give you an intro of who I am, why I have any authority to be talking about the things that I'm talking about, why I wrote the book, why I'm starting a podcast on the book, and just a bunch of other introductory things like that. If you're not interested in hearing about that and you want to get straight into the content, I will put in the description below a timestamp for you to skip ahead to when I start with chapter 1. So to begin, I want to give you a little bit of my background. I am someone who is pursuing a career in law. Specifically, I want to be an attorney, and I want to be an attorney right here in Montana. I've noticed throughout my journey thus far that obtaining a legal internship, getting information in order to know what you're doing for law school, both prior, during, and post, seems to be a bit hard because of how unique Montana's legal dynamic is. Thus, I saw a unique opportunity to provide insight using not only perspectives from myself, but also the resources that I've gathered along the way. And thus, I wrote my ebook, A Guide to Legal Internships in Montana. This ebook is a completely free resource for you to use and download. And although it's not a comprehensive guide to everything that you should do, I definitely think that it can provide some thoughtful guidance in some of the areas that I particularly would have loved to have had some. And so I hope that that can be a great resource for you. And then now I'm starting this podcast to kind of expand on the content that I wrote about in my book in order to kind of provide some perspective and how that applies to the real world. I know that sometimes that distinction can be the most tricky part about utilizing any sort of resource when navigating your journey towards your career, is that you're not really sure how to apply it or how it specifically fits for your situation. And so I think providing some context of how it fit to mine may be helpful. And so that's why I'm starting this podcast. I will also preface that this podcast, along with the book, were both for classes for my University of Montana College of Business Education. And so this is in tandem with a course that I am taking. And so let's get into why I have the authority to talk about any of these things. Well, first of all, I am a legal intern, and I have been for over a year and a half now at Reed Bell & Jasper PC here in Missoula, Montana. When I was looking for an internship, I saw an ad in a job posting, a newsletter at the university for a marketing intern at this local law firm. And I knew that it would be the perfect way for me to get my foot in the door, have an internship that not only utilized my undergraduate education, but would be positive for my future education and career path in law. And so I took that position, I interviewed and was given it, and I slowly worked my way up in the firm to now being a full-time legal intern / legal assistant. I work on all kinds of things, ranging from organizing files, drafting legal documents and briefs, legal research, and a bunch of other fantastic things that are just giving me such a great foundation towards not only being able to get into law school, but then also my future career in law post law school. So not only do I have a legal internship, but I've been through what most of you have been through or are going through right now, which is the stress of trying to find one, how to find one, what they're looking for, and then how that then applies to your whether you're looking to get into law school, how that applies to your application, whether you're already in law school and how that applies to your current curriculum, or post law school and how it can affect what kind of attorney you're going to be. And I think that the internships that you take along any part of that journey are incredibly pivotal to the attorney you're going to become and gaining great opportunities along that journey. So it definitely has a snowball effect. It definitely has in my life. And so I just want to make sure that I am sharing all of the knowledge that I have from not only the parts of those journeys that I've been on in the past, but also the ones that I'm continuing on right now. And so sharing that perspective is something that I think is particularly important. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. I originally wrote the book for a class. However, with that said, I definitely think that it's going to be a fantastic resource for people to use who are pursuing a future career in law, specifically specifically here in the state of Montana. My perspective is rooted in Montana with the goal of staying in Montana, and so I definitely don't want to perpetuate that this is a one-size-fit-all solution for every single person pursuing a career in law. So the ebook that I wrote is called A Guide to Legal Internships in Montana. You can get the book on a website called Gumroad. It will be linked in the description below and is also linked to my website, which is www.406legalinternships.com. Going on this website is essentially where I would recommend going, just because it's not only going to house these podcast episodes, but it also houses the book, a platform for question and answer, how you can get in contact with me with your specific questions, and just any other future resources that I come across that I think could be particularly valuable. So I recommend looking at that website. I recommend subscribing to this YouTube channel. That way you get notified every single time I post a podcast, in case that's something that can be relevant for you. Today we're going to be covering chapters 1 through 3 of my book. However, I do recommend that you go and read those first. That way you kind of have some context and foundation on what I'm talking about. In future episodes, I'll cover the subsequent chapters of the book. Again, hoping to sprinkle in some of my perspective and experience in the real world in order to make that a little bit more tangible for you. So let's get right into it. So chapter 1 is an introductory chapter, and it offers some insight into the guide. I offer some encouragement, what you can expect in the guide. I'm not going to go over those things because obviously if you're reading it, you'll know, and so go ahead and read through those if you're interested. But the main things that are highlighted in this introductory chapter is that legal internships provide really great hands-on learning, networking opportunities, mentorship opportunities, and overall, a legal internship is going to look fantastic on any application, whether you're trying to get into law school especially, or if you're in law school trying to pursue a clerkship or some other sort of clinical in your third year like we have here in Montana. This can be a great chapter to kind of open up your eyes and show you that a legal internship may very well be the experience you need to decide whether this is something for you or whether it's not, and anything that comes thereafter. So now let's move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is very content heavy and a little less perspective heavy, and that's just because I think it's really important that you understand the legal field in Montana. And so again, this isn't something that is comprehensive. Please do your own research on the structure of the legal system in Montana. If you're going to attend school here, if you're going to have an internship here, and if you're going to practice here, all of those things are incredibly pivotal to know, as they're going to literally provide the foundation for you to move forward. Your research has to start somewhere, and I think giving yourself the foundation of what does the legal world in Montana really look like is a really important building block to then make your informed decisions on what internships you want, where you want to go to law school, where you want to practice, and what you want to practice. So let's kind of jump into that. Generally, there's considered to be 2 different sectors of law. One is criminal and one is civil. Criminal generally is rooted in punishment or a penalty, providing justice to victims of someone who has committed a criminal or unlawful offense. Usually this is met with jail time, fines, community service, things of that nature. And then the civil world deals more with individual disputes or disputes between entities, and the goal is usually financial compensation for some wrongdoing, negligence, or a whole host of other things. Civil is definitely a very large umbrella that I really encourage you to take a deep dive down, because there is so many different subcategories in the civil realm. And so even if you're someone who is looking to only do criminal law, maybe you just want to be a criminal defense attorney or even a prosecutor, sometimes various civil suits can result in criminal charges being brought against someone. And so understanding at least the periphery of both will help you build an understanding of possibly what you want to pursue and where you need to spend your time in your internships, where you need to get those internships, what attorneys you're hoping to study under, whether you want to be in private practice, whether you want to work for the state, all of which I'll get into in later chapters. Let's talk about a couple different civil categories. There's administrative law, constitutional, contract, and tort, which is kind of business law. There's family law, there's intellectual property, employment, personal injury, workers' compensation, and a whole host of other ones. I really would encourage that you research all the different types of civil law. in order to kind of build yourself a foundation. And I also want to just stress the fact that you don't have to pick between criminal and civil law when you decide to practice. You can be a criminal defense attorney while also being a civil plaintiff's lawyer. Let's move on to kind of the court structure. This is probably one of the most important things that you need to know before starting a legal internship. If you're already in law school, you probably know these things, and so you may be able to skip ahead a little bit, but if you haven't had a legal internship yet, or you are not in law school, this is definitely something that you need to memorize and have a good understanding of prior. I use it every day in my legal internship. I need to know what suits are appropriate in what courts. I have to be able to look up whether I'm filing the initial complaint or just trying to find the case on what's called e-file, which is the filing software, and I'll talk about that in subsequent chapters. So one of the lower level courts in Montana is called city or municipal court. Municipal court really just consists mainly of traffic tickets and minor infractions within the city limits. That can include like ordinance violations, very small scale things, but still things that need to be addressed by our judicial system nonetheless. Kind of the next tier, oftentimes seen as pretty even with municipal court, but I kind of think of it as a step up on the ladder, is justice court. Usually justice court handles minor criminal offenses, more serious traffic or ticket offenses that rise above the level of city court, like sometimes a first DUI, depending on the circumstances, will be in justice court as opposed to district court, because it's obviously raised above the level of city court, even if it was within city limits. And then any civil matter that involves a low monetary value of damages is usually held in justice court. And this is actually referred to as small claims court. And fun fact about small claims court is you actually can't have an attorney represent you. You have to be pro se, which means that you represent yourself. Now let's move on to district court, which is probably the one that you've heard about the most because this is a trial court. More major offenses that rise above the level of the justice or city court. It can be criminal or civil offenses. They also handle the appeals of both of those lower courts that I just mentioned, which is interesting. There's a ladder system for appeals, and so those two lower courts appeal directly to district court. And then obviously from district court, they can appeal to the higher courts as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. The next court on our ladder is the Montana Supreme Court. This is the highest state court in Montana, and they hear any appeal from the district court, essentially. And so this can be cases ranging from criminal cases, this can be civil cases of all different subcategories. The Montana Supreme Court is interesting. It's made up a little bit differently in its structure of justices as our district court, municipal, and justice courts are. And so I'm not going to get into all those details today in this podcast, but I definitely encourage you to, because it's definitely something that's important. Supreme Court decisions in the state of Montana are important case law to understand, and it'd be hard to understand those things without understanding the structure of the Montana Supreme Court, what they do, and what their decisions really mean. And so definitely dive into that a bit more. I definitely would say the same is true for the lower courts that I just mentioned, but their decisions don't necessarily hold as much weight as the Montana Supreme Court does, and any suits going on in the district court can be ruled by orders and decisions that set precedents in the Montana Supreme Court. So definitely something you should be looking at, even if you don't plan to be a litigator. If you plan to do more contract-oriented law, these are still things that can govern over those things. So very important for you to learn. Finally is the federal court. Montana is in the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. We have federal district courts in Billings, Butte, Great Falls, and of course here in Helena as well. And then of course here in Missoula. They handle cases that deal with either federal law, of course, inherently, but they also deal with interstate disputes. So even if something is, let's say, a personal injury case where a trucker out of Texas injures a local Montanan in a motor vehicle crash. Because that individual is from Texas and likely their trucking company is as well, this is an interstate dispute because it's a Montanan versus a Texan. And so this would have to be held in federal court. Federal court also has a really interesting structure and is governed by a whole host of different procedures. The Montana Supreme Court also has a few different ones, but largely you can see the similarities between district court, the lower courts, and the Montana Supreme Court, but federal court is largely different. Just to have some background, I definitely think it's important to research those things. That way you kind of know what to expect when you're helping on those different types of cases, whether they're in federal court, whether they're in district court, raising to the level of the Montana Supreme Court, etc. It's very important that you understand all of those different procedural differences and how the structure of the federal Ninth Circuit is built up and what they do, and how important their decisions are as well, because federal decisions also hold a lot of weight, especially on future federal decisions. Let's kind of talk about legal proceedings. I know I spoke a little bit about it before. There's different types of hearings, there's different legal documents, but how do you actually start a lawsuit? And I think this is something that not everyone who's going to pursue a career in law necessarily knows about until you've had an internship and you've actually gotten to see it firsthand. It's just not really something anybody talks about, because if you need to file suit against someone, you hire a lawyer. It's not something that most people do on their own, although you can be pro se in many different types of matters. Starting a legal proceeding generally starts out with, in the criminal world, obviously the state may charge you with something, or the city may charge you with something in the case of the lower courts. And in the civil world, you can file a complaint. There's also a little bit different verbiage used in certain types of civil matters, such as family law matters or guardianship matters. Those are called petitions as opposed to a complaint, but all of which kind of refer to the same thing, which is an initial filing with some background facts and a explanation of why you're filing against somebody, what they did, what it violates, etc. It kind of just lays the groundwork in opening up the case. And these are legal documents that have to be filed with the court. And so that's kind of how a legal proceeding begins, whether it's criminal or civil. And it doesn't really matter whether it's federal court or district court, state district court. Both are filed in the same fashion. You have to file that initial pleading in order for anything to be started. And then once you do, you have to serve that within a certain number of days on the parties that you are against or that you are bringing suit against. And then it goes from there. And then pretrial procedures start. This includes discovery, settlement negotiations. Discovery is particularly important in criminal cases. Obviously, understanding what happened and what evidence they have against the defendant is really important for a defense attorney. It's also important for the prosecution to ensure that they have all their ducks in a row and that they have plenty of evidence stacked against to prove that someone committed that crime and provide justice to any victim in that situation. Same can be said for civil cases. It is important that the plaintiffs, whom have a duty to have evidence to support the claims that they bring under Rule 11. It just really provides the foundation for the case, provides the information needed, because when you bring a suit, you don't necessarily always have all of the information. You have enough in order to bring the suit, but ensuring that you're getting more information in order to strengthen your claims, regardless of what side you're on, is super important. So that's a pretrial procedure that we'll begin to be engaged in. And it's also important that I mentioned settlement or mediation. This is something that happens particularly in civil matters. However, negotiations of plea offers are also something that happen during this time in criminal matters. Oftentimes mediation is required in civil matters, a settlement conference of some kind, just to see if it's something that can be settled between the parties without having to pursue further litigation and therefore cost a lot of money to both sides. Sometimes it doesn't work out and litigation continues to trial, but a lot of the time it does. A large percentage, 98% of civil cases settle before they ever go to trial. And so this is something that is generally standard practice, especially here in the state of Montana, in pretrial procedures. There's also more pretrial procedures, but I'm not going to get into those just because it would take me a long time, but I definitely encourage you to research research the different types of motions and different practices that take place in that pre-trial part of a case. Moving on is the actual trial, which is by judge, a bench trial, or a jury trial of your peers. The trial can be either one of those, regardless of what type of proceeding you're in. Although again, on the civil side, it doesn't typically get to that point. Moving on to the appeals part though. Once a judgment has been ruled, and so whether that's a sentence to a criminal defendant or a judgment in a civil proceeding, you have the right to appeal unless you've waived that right in a plea or some sort of settlement agreement. You have the right to appeal it. And again, I've already talked a little bit about the appeal structure, so I'm not going to go back over that. But again, if you're in a district court case, you appeal to the Montana Supreme Court, etc. Now let's talk a little bit about parties, which are super important because although it just kind of seems like a bunch of random terms, parties are super important to understanding what you're reading in a document because these words replace names. And so if I'm filing suit against John Doe, they're not just going to say Jaden said this, Jaden said this, Jaden alleges this. They're going to say plaintiff alleges this, and defendant denies this. And even that is even true when it comes to companies, or if there's more than one plaintiff, it's plaintiffs or defendants. And so it's very important that you understand what correct terminology needs to be used based on the type of suit, not only for your understanding of reading that, whether it be case law, whether it be documents you're helping to draft, or anything in between. Super important that you understand this. And I find it pretty simple, but if you're confused, totally fair. This isn't something that oftentimes people are engaging in or having to do in their everyday life. So let's go over it. First, let's start with civil. In civil cases, the person bringing the suit is called the plaintiff, and the person who the suit is being brought against is called the defendant. However, I will say, and this applies to any appeal, whether criminal, civil, otherwise, there's the appellant, who is the one who is appealing the decision, and then there's the appealee, who is the one who's on the other side of that appeal. And so if someone is, let's say a judgment is rendered against someone who has broken a contract, breach of contract, and they found the defendant did in fact breach that contract. If the defendant wishes to appeal, they then become the appellant, and the prior plaintiff, who the original judgment was in favor of, because the defendant breached the contract, is then the appealee in that suit. The roles get a little bit reversed because either side, whether it be the plaintiff or the defendant, can bring the appeal, and whoever brings the appeal is known as the appellant, and the appealee is on the other side. And again, this also cross applies to criminal. When you're looking at criminal proceedings, the prosecution is usually the one who brings about charges. That is the state or the city in the lower courts. And this is the person who's bringing about charges against an individual. And then the defendant is whom the charges are being brought against. Also, civil can be a little bit interesting. Like I said, there's a lot of different subcategories in the civil world, and a little bit of different terminology comes with a few of them. Although in most civil proceedings, it's plaintiff and defendant. In some civil proceedings, specifically family law and probate, estate, and guardianship cases, all of those are different types, they are actually referred to as petitioner and respondent. If you refer back a little bit earlier, I talked about how although oftentimes it's referred to as a complaint that's brought for a civil suit, sometimes it's called a petition. And so you're petitioning the court to ask for those things. And so that is called a petitioner, the one who's bringing about the suit or the petition. And then the respondent is the person who's responding to the petition. And yeah, those are super important. And again, I know I didn't go into in depth about them, but if there's anything that you're confused on, you should definitely do your own research or even ask me on my website. We have that question and answer if you'd like me to go into detail, or you have a specific situation that you're confused about. I'm happy to provide some insight. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit from this foundational knowledge, although I would argue that this next part is foundational knowledge. That's kind of the very basics of what you need to know about the Montana legal system. I've given you a little bit of insight on the different types of courts, how a proceeding is started, different types of proceedings, and what parties are involved in those proceedings. Those are all super foundational, so if there's any part of that you're confused on, I encourage you to refer back to the book in order to understand that in chapter 2. However, if that also isn't helpful to you, I encourage you to do your own research, because this is something you're going to need to know before having a legal internship. Let's talk about an intern's role in all of that, though. And I want to preface that by saying that this is incredibly situational. Every single firm uses their interns differently. An intern isn't a one-size-fit-all position. Interns don't do the same thing from firm to firm, state to state, city to city, anything. Usually an intern's role is different based on what firm they're at. And even sometimes their role can be different based on what attorney they're interning under in that firm. That doesn't necessarily apply to smaller firms, but definitely applies to the larger ones. Let's talk a little bit about my situation. So the firm that I work for would be considered a small firm. It's a 3-attorney firm here in Missoula, and that means that I have direct involvement with every single one of the attorneys in most, if not all, of their cases. That means I'm drafting legal documents, doing legal research, talking to them, talking to clients, other administrative tasks, and other different things that I'll talk about in a moment that interns do on almost every single case that our firm has. And so that's civil cases, criminal cases, and all of the subcategories involved in all of those different things. So I think that it's really important that an intern's role is not generalized. Like, obviously an intern's role is to help the attorneys always, like that's just blanket, like do what your attorney needs you to do. And hopefully your attorney is also thinking about your education in those different things, and they're helping you to learn along the way and mentoring you and all of those different things. Usually that's something that can be generalized, and I'll talk about a few generalities in a moment between most different types of firms, especially in Montana, from doing research of different attorneys that I've met and been able to network with throughout my internship. I will say that it's really important if you're going to be in a small firm, though, if you're really looking to have high involvement in all the cases, get to see every part of a proceeding, get to go to a lot of proceedings. Smaller firms are fantastic for that, but you also have to remember to have really clear boundaries. Because a small firm doesn't necessarily have a ton of interns, there's no one to pick up the slack for you, which means you need to be a really hard worker and get your stuff done and be organized. You need to be accountable to that, but you also need to make sure that you have boundaries, because it is very busy in the legal world, regardless of whether you're at a small firm or a big firm, and it's really easy to get so sucked in that you're not taking care of yourself for a break, because you really don't want to miss out on anything. And that's something that I'm guilty of. I would get up way earlier, be the first one there, be the last one to leave, which are great qualities and are definitely not something I think you shouldn't do. But I definitely think that if those things aren't allowing you to be the best version of yourself and you're not able to take care of yourself because of how much you're putting in, that's definitely something you need to reevaluate and have boundaries from the beginning. Like, know yourself, know your needs, know your limits. That's just super important, especially at a small firm, but also at a big one. Obviously, you probably would be trying to stand out at a big firm, and so you could be guilty of the same thing. But regardless of whether you're at a small firm or a big one, and regardless of your situation as an intern, make sure that you have boundaries. That's just one of the biggest pieces of advice. A work-life balance is something that's so important to being a happy professional and legal professional, just generally, regardless of what stage in that journey you're in. Let's talk a little bit about larger firms. It's likely more structured of an experience. Larger firms usually have calculated what they need out of their interns, just in a business capacity. And so usually you'll have much more structured tasks. You'll know what every single day is going to look like likely. You'll probably be assigned to certain cases with, or even possibly certain attorneys. And so it's a bit less variable as a small firm would be. Like, I don't know what I'm going to be working on necessarily every day. I don't know what's going to come up. I know that we have certain deadlines on the calendar, but that's about the most structure I have. Whereas at a larger firm, you may only be working on a couple cases, and so you know that those are going to be the cases that come up that you need to work on that day, regardless of what ends up coming up. And so I would say that it's likely a little bit less hands-on. You probably don't get to work with as many attorneys, but I will say that you probably do get to see a lot more variety in cases just because of how big your firm is. And so there's pros and cons to being at a small firm or a large firm. I'll talk about that in later chapters. It's definitely something you should research, whether you want to be a part of big law or smaller law. In Montana, we don't really necessarily have big law like other very large cities or in larger populated states. But I will say there are larger firms in Montana and there are smaller firms in Montana. Both have fantastic attorneys, but definitely different experiences, not only for the attorney, but also for the intern. So doing that research is really important. Let's go over a few similarities though, between the two. Common tasks that I think you should be prepared for, whether you do this on a daily or even do it at all, is not something I can predict for you. But I can tell you that if you are well versed in all of these different things, you definitely will have a good enough foundation to not only do them when they ask you, but also do the things that they ask you that is not on this list, because evidently there's going to be some. The first is legal research. Please, 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 please become familiar with how to search cases using various research softwares, whether it be Westlaw, etc. Whatever that firm uses, you need to be able to use it. You need to be able to identify case law. You need to be able to read that case law and find what's most important in it, and you need to be efficient at those things. So practicing that, making sure that you understand what it means to do legal research is super important. You also need to be really familiar with the code books, which is something that people don't talk about a lot, but is something I've ran into in my internship. I've been asked to do a lot of legal research and find cases that say certain things, find orders, judgments, that will support an attorney's brief, argument, etc. However, the thing that they asked me to go find the most is a certain code or state statute. And so there is a state code book. Montana in particular uses them, and that's where my experience is. That's what I'm going to talk about. There is statutes, codes, ordinances, everything in between that governs law in the state of Montana is going to be found in those code books. Also, civil procedure is found in there and different procedures for the courts. So familiarizing yourself with it based on what I just talked about is also important. So make sure that you're familiar with the code books and how to find them online and how to use them. Some attorneys will even prefer that you go and find the code in the book for them. They prefer the paper in hand as opposed to the online model. I would recommend finding it online and then flipping to that page, just because it seems to be a bit easier, for me at least. But definitely familiarize yourself with what the Montana Code annotateds are, and what types of things they have in them, and make sure that you understand how to navigate it. And how to find keywords, and you kind of understand holistically what can be found there, because when they ask you to find a certain statute, it can take you a really, really long time if you don't know what you're looking for or even how to look for it. Let's talk a little bit about drafting legal documents. This isn't something you're probably going to be able to practice. If you can, great, and you find a good way to do that, that's fantastic. I don't necessarily encourage that, because every attorney writes differently and has a little bit of a different spin on the way that they draft legal documents or like them drafted. Like I said before, there are different procedural things that have to be consistent between all pleadings. Like, for example, it's supposed to be type 14 Arial font, double spaced. Pleadings are for Montana. District courts, federal court is Times New Roman. And so there's some differences and similarities there. However, I will say that you do need to become familiar with what different types of legal documents can be drafted and what they mean. Understanding kind of the legal jargon and legal terminology is really important for this, kind of like I talked about a few moments ago. Becoming familiar with deadlines, like for example, when a motion's filed, you have 14 days to respond to it, unless it's a motion for summary judgment or a couple other different types of motions, in which case you have 21 days. It's really important to understand those deadlines and know where to find them, because otherwise you may have a court document come in and you have no idea that you're supposed to be helping your attorney, and then it becomes the due date and you're behind. And so understanding not only what pleadings can come at various times in a case, what those pleadings have within them, possibly how to draft them, but also the deadlines for them in a case is super important. And that's, again, likely something that you're going to have to learn as you go and is more experiential than anything. That's at least what I've learned. I've tried to look it up, tried to memorize it, There's just so much, but once you do it a few times, you really do understand how to do it. There's more common types of motions, like motion to continue a hearing or something like that, that is much more common and are ones you'll pick up quickly. But I wouldn't say to worry too much. I do think you should memorize court procedure. I do think you should be aware of it. I do think you should understand how to calendar deadlines and different things like that and be aware of them. But I also just want you to know, like, don't panic if you don't know how to draft anything when you start your legal internship. Like, your attorneys know that, and you likely will have access to previous drafts of ones that have been done in either that case or other cases that are similar. When I don't know how to draft something, I look in our files for one. I search it on Dropbox is the one that we use, and I find one that's in a similar type of case, and I figure out the wording from that and cross-apply it to the case. It does require you to be pretty analytical and to be self-sufficient and self-motivating, but as long as you have those skills and know kind of where to look, you'll be able to find things to reference, so don't panic too much. And oftentimes an attorney will draft something for you before you put it into a pleading and then review it afterwards. At the end of the day, an attorney should always be reviewing the work that you're doing, and so if you do mess up, that's okay. Just make sure you learn from it, or if you don't know how to do something, ask. Always ask. Even if you think that it's stupid that you don't know, you're gonna look dumb, etc. I promise you that you don't. I promise that the attorneys are going to value the fact that you're asking questions and not just doing something and wasting their time as a result. So that's definitely something that I've picked up in legal drafting that is just so important, is don't guess. Like, just ask. And also review everything that you do draft for an attorney multiple times before you give it to them, because it is a waste of their time to have to go through and grammar check something for you. And so just make sure that you are freshened up on your grammar skills, you're using some sort of grammar software, or you're having someone else review it, or you're self-reviewing it a few times, because that's definitely important in legal drafting. Let's move on to client interaction. Be ready to interact with clients and assist in case management. This is something that I actually spend a ton of time on as a legal intern. It really does require a lot of patience, compassion, and an extreme sense of organization. I will say that in an attorney's office, in a larger firm, you may have less communication with clients. In a smaller firm, you may have more, just because in a smaller firm, you help with more administrative tasks as an intern than you do in a bigger firm. This includes answering the phones, answering emails, setting meetings, handling an attorney's calendar. These are all things that I work with on a daily basis. And it really does sometimes test your patience. You really need to be very compassionate when listening to clients or even potential clients' stories, even if you don't think it has merit or think that they're just being dramatic, or maybe you really are interested in what they're saying. Making sure that you maintain a high level of professionalism is really important. Likely a firm wouldn't have you do anything like this if they didn't think that you had the standard of professionalism needed, but understanding the responsibility that you have and that you're representing the whole firm when you're talking to a client is really important. And that case management can be anything from just giving them an update on their case to getting information for discovery responses or even discovery requests. It can be adding things to their file. It can be calendaring a deadline in their case, a court proceeding in their case. Really a lot of different things can be involved in client interaction. So it's super important that you understand your own organizational abilities and what you need to do to be hyper organized. I personally like to use sticky notes. I write down tasks on my sticky notes and I throw away the sticky note as soon as the task is completed. When I need to call someone, I write down their phone number on the paper. That way, if I have to give a note to an attorney, it's all right there for them. I mean, there'll be little things that you pick up as you go, but overall, you need to remember to be patient, compassionate, and be organized in whatever way that fits you best. Fourth is going to be court observation. This is my favorite thing that I do as an intern. I love to go watch court proceedings. Not only do I always learn so much in a court proceeding, but it also is a fantastic networking opportunity. You meet attorneys on the other side, you meet the judge oftentimes, or the justice, depending on where you're at. It's one of the best opportunities, but I'll tell you that make sure that you're prepared to understand what a court proceeding looks like and the etiquette that you're supposed to maintain. This is something I did not do and regret that. I did not know what I was supposed to do from the moment I walked into a courtroom with an attorney, and it led to a little bit of embarrassment, some laughs. I'm over it now. But court observation is something that will be very valuable to you, and so it's really important that you make a great impression in doing it. That way your attorneys continue to take you. Hopefully this is an opportunity that you too get to earn, but do make sure that you go through some etiquette. Like, for example, I didn't know, and I probably should have known, but in some courts, they don't say all rise and introduce a judge. You won't necessarily see that everywhere you go, every single court proceeding, even though it's something that is supposed to happen and is largely held in the media as something that always happens. It doesn't. So I had no idea that I was supposed to be paying attention for the judge to come in and stand when he did. And so I looked a little bit dumb because I saw everyone stand up, and so I quickly tried to stand up as well and accidentally caught the eye of the judge. And so that was something that I was able to just move on from, but it's definitely not something that I was very proud of. Also, I wasn't sure where I was supposed to sit. When I entered the courtroom with the attorney, I have been very fortunate that my attorneys have invited me to sit at counsel table with them. This is a very rare opportunity. I would say it's less rare at a small firm and is less rare in Montana generally than it is in other states. However, it's not something that you will get to do all the time, and it's definitely a valuable thing, but you definitely have to earn it. But if you're not sitting at counsel table, or even if you are and you don't know whether you are, you definitely have to take your attorney's lead. One way that you can do that is you can just see whether they hold. There's always a little gate or threshold between where members of the public can sit in a court proceeding and where counsel sits, and then obviously the judge is in front of counsel. And so kind of understanding what a courtroom looks like, that's definitely something you should research if you don't know. And if they hold that open for you, then go in. I mean, being able to take those social cues is important. So if those aren't things that come naturally to you, you definitely need to be thinking about it and thinking ahead. However, generally, you're not going to be sitting at counsel table, and so always sit in the first row behind your attorney. Sitting behind them is a signifier that you are with them and that you are supporting them. And if your client happens to be there, I always recommend sitting with them. I know I've made some really great connections with our clients as a result of doing just that. Hopefully you'll be able to do court observation. If not, it's definitely something that you would probably have to earn the opportunity to. If you're not someone who's going to engage in litigation, it's probably not something that concerns you if you're just doing contracts, but it is something that is very important for someone who is going to pursue litigation as a career, regardless of where you're at in your journey. Finally is administrative support. I think that this is something that's more applicable to a small firm than it is to a large firm. However, I do still think that you do some of these tasks inherently in a large firm, just because usually they want you to see through your project. So if you're drafting a brief for them and you're getting all the exhibits ready, you should probably be the person to file it because you know what's going on and what order those things need to go in. Sometimes that won't happen, but in my firm it definitely does. And so I find myself filing lots of legal documents each day, scheduling with clients, making sure I'm putting things on the calendar. I can't stress that enough, how important an attorney's calendar is. Deadlines, court proceedings, their calendar runs their life, and if something's incorrect on it, it can look really bad and reflect badly on them, and thus reflect badly on you because you're the one who did it. And so this is definitely an area for interns that is under-acknowledged as valuable, but is definitely where I've learned the most. Not only do I file documents with the court, but when you get court documents that were filed by someone else or that you even filed, they're docketed with the court. And you have to have a file that includes all of those things that mirror that docket. That way you have everything that's going on in a case at your disposal, and so does your attorney. And so making sure that you're super organized is important. It builds those skills. You also learn a lot just by reading things, figuring out where things go, reading the different types of documents. I think I've picked up more information when I'm filing things just in our files, whether it's a physical file where you physically print it and put it in there, or online. That depends completely on the firm you're working for, what type of filing system they use. But once you learn the filing system, I really encourage you to use it. It's something that interns generally find boring, and it is. Printing something and putting it in a file is definitely not something that is super glamorous or as fun as, helping to draft a brief and file it and et cetera, but it's definitely just as important. I mean, making sure a file is complete for an attorney, especially if they have an upcoming court hearing, is so important, and it's something that's overlooked, and your part in that is also equally important. And so it's a great learning opportunity. It's a great way you can get involved, and it's a great low level, low stress way to show that you are really committed, that you're organized, and that you are trying your best to learn the cases. A lot of the time, that's how I learned what any of the cases were about. Especially ones that I didn't work on at first. Now I work on most of them, so it's not as much of an issue, but learning what the case is about was important for me to being able to file it. And so then I had much better grasp on the cases that our firm had, and thus I was able to be a lot more helpful when I was given a task for those cases, or if there was something that I noticed that I thought I should bring up to the attorney. Lots of different things are at play when it comes to administrative support. Not the most glamorous, but definitely one of the most important, especially when you're starting out as an intern. So please do not undervalue that experience. The key and most pivotal piece is you making it that, and that involves you taking what you learn to heart and being really reflective. I mean, listening to a judge talk, you can either zone out or hear the words that they're saying, or you can think critically about the things that they're saying and how you can apply that to the future. I once got to go into judges' chambers with one of my attorneys, and they talked about how they saw juries and how they personally felt about a certain part of the structure of a jury. I'm not going to share what that is. But they had a very interesting opinion to me, and I could have just been like, oh, well, that's their opinion. But no, I thought critically about it, and I even spoke to my attorney about it and talked about how, not only did I find that take very interesting and very applicable, but I also understood how it could be applied strategically when having cases in front of that judge. And so, taking it a step further for that reflection in no matter what you do is important. So although I don't think that interns in Montana ever have a super structured, besides what's inherently helping you to grow as a professional, I think that you really have to step up and take those opportunities and take the reins and make them into professional development opportunities. And if you do that, you will be incredibly successful. Now that you kind of know what a legal intern's role kind of looks like, in a firm, generally, again, situational, but now that you kind of understand what that looks like a little bit more clearly, let's address what firms want in a legal intern, because they're different. I will say that this is something I'm largely going to save for my book and ask you to go read it. I hate it when people do that when I'm listening to a podcast, because I'm like, oh, this is something that's so cool, and then now I got to go read about it. The reason I want you to go read about it as opposed to me just reading it to you is because I think reading it to you is dumb and less comprehensive, but also if you go to page 10 of my book, which is where this portion starts, it includes direct testimony from the owners of several very successful law firms here in the state of Montana, specifically based in Missoula as well, in what they want in a legal intern. And so if you're looking to intern at any of those offices, you literally have verbatim what they want from you. And I think that that's super important. It's something that I was super stoked to put in my book, and it's something that I'm hoping to maybe do an episode on if I can get some more testimonials. But I got several from managing partners / owners of various firms here, and I think that they all provide some unique and important insight into things that you should be focusing on, not only prior to applying, but also in the application and interview process with being an intern. And so I definitely think that these are some of the best firms in the state, in my opinion. And so I definitely think you should go read those. But in general, I think that you need to ensure that the following are covered when you're reaching out or showcasing your potential to a potential employer for a legal internship. You need to have a strong academic, these are not going to surprise you, and what each of these mean is individualized for every person. And so you may have more questions about what that looks like for you, and it also can be individualized based on the firm. And so doing your research on what it looks like for that firm, each of these things that I'm going to list off, is important, so make sure that you do that. But also what it looks like for you, you're gonna have to do some self-reflection. Like for example, the first is a strong academic background. Well, what does that look like for you? Because a strong academic background for one person may not be the exact same as for another person. Consistencies exist, of course. Obviously, good grades are probably a part of that. Experiential learning of things that are applicable to the legal field are part of that. But other than that, you can have a lot of differences. And so doing some self-reflection on each of these things is important, and doing some research. Again, if you have any specific questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. The form is there on my website, 406legalinternships.com, in order for you to use it for things just like that. So if you want my opinion, I'm totally happy to give it. So again, a strong academic background, legal research, again, I know we already went over some of these. Legal research and writing skills are very important. Attention to detail is probably the most important thing, especially if you're looking to work under an attorney or work with civil cases. Civil cases have a higher threshold of specificity, and as a result, it requires you to be much more detail-oriented, and your attorneys are going to require that of you. So again, attention to detail. You need to have analytical skills, and if you're looking to pursue a career in law and you've gotten this far, you probably have them. But if you're not really sure what it means to have analytical skills, that's something you should do some research on. Probably depends and varies a little bit, but you really need to be able to think for yourself, interpret information, and give a positive reflection on that information. That's generally what's encompassed in analytical skills. You need to have good communication skills. If you can't communicate with the attorneys, you can't communicate with clients, you probably won't be a very strong attorney. An attorney's job is rooted in communication and rhetoric and negotiation skills, and all of those things require a very strong communicative ability. And so if that's something you struggle with, if you're not a super outgoing person, it doesn't come naturally to you, etc., you need to work on those things. Moving on, time management. Oh my gosh. If you are a procrastinator, that's fine, but you need to have a very good sense of what that means to you in order to manage your time effectively. I am not a procrastinator, and so I definitely can't speak to any tricks I have for those of you who are, but what I can say is that no matter who you are, whether you are a procrastinator or not, you're gonna have to have a pretty good organizational ability and process that fits your needs. You need to be able to manage your time well and get the things done that need to be done on time. Professionalism and work ethic, I think those go without saying. Nobody comes to an attorney on their best day, and so making sure that you're compassionate and professional and are always giving 110% for your clients is very important, whether you're an intern or an actual attorney. You need to be able to be collaborative, teamwork. You also need to be able to be a leader, though. You need to be able to rise to the occasion and have leadership ability, but you also need to understand when you need to step down and let someone else lead, or take a hint from someone else, or take directive from someone else. That'll happen a lot. You're an intern, you're the lowest on the totem pole. Oftentimes legal assistants and paralegals are going to be your best friend and your best form of knowledge and help for collaborating on various projects, or just to provide insight into attorneys and cases and things of that nature. If you're not able to collaborate with them in an effective way, you will not be successful. And so make sure you're nice to everyone, make sure you have a great working relationship with all of your team members, and most importantly, make sure that you as a person are not someone who has a lone wolf mentality. You're able to collaborate with them while still maintaining that you can be a leader when necessary. And finally, you need to be adaptable and flexible. This includes stress management. And this is something that I could do an entire episode on, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on it, but I'm not going to go super in depth. I talked a little bit earlier about boundaries, and I think that knowing yourself is super, super important. The legal field is forever changing, and no day is going to be dull. Your days between Monday and Friday will all be different. and even sometimes on the weekends. Every day is a new day, and it's different, and it all presents unique challenges, especially with more complicated cases, or even less complicated ones sometimes turn very complicated. It can be dramatic, it can be hard, but you need to maintain professionalism. You need to be able to adapt and be flexible. You also need to be able to handle the stress of all of those things. When something happens in a case or happens to a client, or something unexpected comes up, you need to be able to push forward. That's not to say that there are never times that I haven't, that I've been nervous or have had a lapse in judgment as a result of stress. But I will say that one of the reasons that I am particularly valuable to my firm is because I work well under pressure. When we have a deadline to meet that wasn't calendared by accident, they are confident that I'm going to get it done and that I'm not going to crumble. And that makes me valuable. This is a stressful profession. And if that's something that you are not interested in, or you know yourself well enough to know that you can't do that, that's okay. But this is probably not the field for you. However, I will say, take a legal internship first. See what that looks like in practice, see what you can handle, and then go from there. So that was chapter 2. And again, that was super long, and I am so sorry that that was so content heavy, but I do truly believe that all of the things that I shared with you are incredibly pivotal to your foundation prior to getting a legal internship. Chapter 3 is called Preparing for the Internship. And I think your preparation prior to your internship is probably more important than anything. I mean, it's a trickle-down effect, right? Preparing for your internship, you get a great internship, you're successful in that great internship, then you get into whatever law school you want to be in, or you're already there and you get whatever clinical you're wanting, etc., 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 down the line it goes. And so I think that starting off strong and getting the legal internship that you want, and that is going to make you successful and truly showcase to you the type of attorney you want to be, is so important. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Now let's talk a little bit about the different areas that you need for preparing for a legal internship. The first is obviously your education and your experience, like any job you apply to. You also need various materials. Again, like any other job you apply to, this isn't any different. You need to do some research. If you're smart, you've done this for any other job you've ever applied to, although I will say, like, jobs when you were in high school probably didn't require this much of you. And depending on where you're at in your life, maybe you've never had to. And then the final thing will be practice. So let's get into those. Education and experience are pretty self-explanatory. We already went over what firms want. Focus on building these skills through experiences and have stories that can convey this to them. Don't tell them that you're a hard worker. Be able to show them in the materials of your application, in your showing that you prepared for this internship and that you have the skills necessary through a story or through an experience, not just telling them that you can, because anybody can say that they can. Not everybody can show that they can. Show, don't tell. That's something that our pre-law advisor has just said over and over and over again. Whether you're applying for an internship, applying to law school, etc., using that tip for your life moving forward for any sort of application or job that you're pursuing or opportunity is important. Show, don't tell. And so focus on building those skills. Obviously, we talked a little bit before about having a strong academic background. Obviously, that's different for every person, but your education is going to matter. I mean, likely a firm is going to want you to have graduated high school. They may even have specifications on how far into your undergrad or even law school you are. And so make sure that you've researched that and make sure that you have the appropriate background with your education in order to apply. It's also important that you've been using your education to form a foundation for your legal education. And so you probably have done this, especially if you're in law school. Obviously, you have much more applicable experience because you're actively learning how to be a lawyer. However, I will say that not every firm is going to ask you for your transcript. They may ask you for your GPA, but it's important that you've built that foundation in case they do. Like having applicable classes that are going to help you in the type of law that they're practicing, and that's therefore going to help them, is important. Let's talk about materials a little bit. I will tell you that I go over these a little bit more in depth throughout more of the subsequent chapters, and I also have attached to my ebook in the last few pages are examples of all of these things, and so except for a transcript, I feel like we all know what that is. So I have some examples of all of those things for you in case you're not really sure what I'm talking about or want to go look at that. I would say maybe wait and read the subsequent chapters first, that way you kind of have more context on why I chose the things I did, or if you have questions about it, go refer to those chapters. The first thing is obviously a resume. Now, I have some tips and tricks on resumes that I can give. I think that it's pretty well known, especially if you've been involved in formal education. If you're in the end of your undergrad, you've probably been told, or past that, you've probably been told a million times that you need to have a resume on one page, things like that. Same thing applies here. Make sure that you're putting applicable experience on there. But one piece that I see people make a mistake with, they don't have a personalized cover letter. But having a specific and personalized cover letter is really important. This may be all they read. I mean, do you want it to be a novel? Absolutely not. But you definitely want to do your research on the firm and show that. Like, show that you have researched the firm, that you're really committed to their values and to what they're doing, the type of law they're pursuing, that you're going to be committed to their clients. Writing samples are definitely something you need. And this should be something that you're passionate about and that you're comfortable submitting, and should showcase you as a holistic candidate. I'll talk about writing samples a little bit later in this book, and in this series. But I will say generally I have seen them ask for writing samples all the time. I personally wasn't asked for one because I was hired as a marketing intern first and then promoted to being a legal intern once they realized the potential that I had and the desire I had to pursue law. And so I wasn't asked for a writing sample because at that point they had already kind of seen it, just by the nature of what we were doing and what we were working on at the time. Make sure that you're writing about something that you're passionate about, and make sure that it is showcasing not just that you have a great vocabulary like some people think. Make sure that it shows that you can engage in complex writing styles. You obviously need to have references. I think that goes without saying. You need to have the ability to have written references, and you need to have the ability to have ones that they can call. I would recommend having at least 4 at your disposal, because some references may be better for certain types of jobs or internships than others. Just make sure that these are going to be positive and that you really know what they're going to talk about, and that you have them lined up and that you've already talked to your references so they're ready for that phone call, etc. Make sure that you're doing that prep work. That way it doesn't seem unorganized or unthoughtful when the attorneys start to take a look. Make sure you have a professional photo. They may ask for one, they may not, but you need to make sure that you have one, whether that be for just your social media, for their website, for their social media. Those are where at least I use them and have had mine used most often. As someone who does the social media for the law firm, they're things I use all the time. And then finally, and this is not one that's included in the book, I think you should have a LinkedIn. Make sure that your LinkedIn looks professional and is full. I definitely recommend having a LinkedIn no matter who you are or where you're looking to go. I talked about before, like, those are the examples of the materials I think you should have ready and that you need to have prepared for your internship. I go into each of those a little bit more in depth in subsequent chapters. And again, you can check out the examples of each of those at the end of the ebook. So, third super important thing for preparation of an internship is research. And although I think all the materials are like obviously super important because you can't apply without them, I think doing your research aids in preparing these materials. Doing your research tells you what firms you should apply to. Doing your research tells you what types of law you may want to practice, and then helps you narrow down what firms you're going to apply to. I mean, research should be fueling every single one of your decisions throughout this entire process. And make sure you're doing reflection, like, what are you looking for? and then cross-reference those two things. You need to be researching and understanding a firm's brand if you're going to apply there. You need to make sure that it's consistent with your individual personal values. You need to make sure it's consistent with what you're looking to learn and the type of lawyer you're looking to be. Finally, let's talk a little bit about practice. I know that this kind of sounds dumb, and like some people see it as practicing in a mirror or something like that, but I really think you should do it. I have practiced my answers to every interview question I can think of, every basic one, or even more specific ones that I had ChatGPT type up for me or that I searched on the internet. Practicing talking about the materials that you're applying with, practicing talking about yourself, applying stories and real life experiences and expanding on the things in those materials is super important. And I talk about this in chapter 5. So if you want to skip to that because you're particularly interested in that, please go. But I will say, like, the ability to speak about your skills and know what tools are in your toolbox and how to use them appropriately based on varying questions is super important. And practicing doing that can be pivotal to kind of uncovering the ways in which you're comfortable doing that. And so make sure that you're doing some practice. Now, again, I apologize for the length, but I really do think that everything that we covered today is super, super important to obtaining a legal internship and providing you the foundation for doing so. Again, if you have any questions or think that there's something that I left out or missed, please don't hesitate to contact me. Put it in the comments of this YouTube video, contact me on the Contact Us page on my website. Feel free to contact me on any social media, all of which is linked on the website and will be linked below. I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn, message me on any platform that you can find me. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. This episode had a lot of content that was heavy and long, and you may have a lot of questions, and maybe I didn't hit on all of the answers to them, especially if they're situational and personal. So reach out to me if you need anything. In the next episode, we're going to cover chapters 4 and 5, and hopefully we're going to have Swazig, who is the pre-law advisor at the University of Montana, talk with us a little bit about her take on both of those chapters. So if you want to get ahead and read those chapters beforehand, which I definitely encourage, please head over to my website. You'll have a link to the Gumroad page, which is where you can download my free ebook resource. Don't forget to subscribe, that way and turn notifications on, that way you get notified every time I post a new podcast. Make sure that you are bookmarking my website, that way you have easy access to all of the resources and question and answer and the ability to contact me. Follow me on social media in order to get a hold of me as well, or if you're looking to build community within the pre-law community of Montana. And don't forget to leave my book a review if you do end up reading it and if you have some time. Yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.